He thought she was his, until I stepped in. Now she's mine. The first time he saw her, she wasn't speaking to him, and yet every detail of her presence pulled at something deep in him. She was standing across the small, sunlit cafe, a warm afternoon streaming through the windows, highlighting the soft waves of her hair that fell just past her shoulders. The way she shifted her weight, subtle but deliberate, gave an air of confidence tempered with quiet vulnerability. He noticed it in the slight tilt of her head, the gentle curve of her smile when someone cracked a joke at the next table. That laugh, light, melodious, and unforced, lingered in the air longer than the words, wrapping around him with an inexplicable pull. Another man approached her, too eager, too sure of himself, and she didn't seem entirely uncomfortable, but she also didn't reciprocate. Her hand brushed lightly against his shoulder, a polite barrier, firm but graceful. It was a gesture that spoke of boundaries and self-possession, and the narrator felt a stir of protective instinct he hadn't expected. The world seemed to narrow around her, the background chatter fading as he took in every subtle movement. The way she adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, the way her eyes lingered on the menu before flicking back to the man talking to her. He couldn't stop himself from noticing the small details that betrayed her humanity. The slight crease of her brow when she considered something, the gentle sigh she let slip when the conversation stalled, the tiny, almost imperceptible bite of her lower lip when she was caught between politeness and annoyance. Each observation drew him in, not in a calculated way, but with a sense of admiration and curiosity. She moved through the space with a quiet elegance, a presence that felt deliberate yet effortless, commanding attention without demanding it. He caught the subtle scent of her perfume, floral but not overpowering, the kind that clings softly to the air after someone passes by. It reminded him of late summer evenings, of warmth and comfort he hadn't realized he craved until now. The other man continued pressing for attention, unaware of the unspoken tension building in the space between them. And then, almost instinctively, the narrator shifted slightly, careful not to draw attention to himself, yet aware of a protective surge he couldn't ignore. It wasn't lust or infatuation, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper, a recognition of her presence, of the steadiness beneath her surface, of a strength paired with a vulnerability she didn't broadcast but didn't entirely hide either. And in that instant, as she glanced briefly in his direction, a fleeting connection passed. A spark, unspoken, unclaimed, but undeniable. He didn't know her name yet, but in that small electric moment, he felt a certainty that she would leave a mark on his life, one that neither time nor circumstance would easily erase. By the time she turned away, her attention returning to the conversation with the other man, he knew something had shifted within him. That soft, graceful energy, that subtle balance of strength and warmth, had pulled him into a story he hadn't anticipated but already felt inexorably drawn toward. And somewhere, beneath the ordinary motions of the cafe, a slow-burning tension had been lit, waiting to unfurl. After that first fleeting impression, the next encounter felt almost inevitable. He found himself in the same cafe a few days later, not by chance but drawn there by the memory of her presence. The way the sunlight had caught her hair, the faint warmth of her perfume, the soft confidence in her movements. She was seated at a corner table, flipping through a book, entirely absorbed. He noticed how her fingers traced the pages almost absent-mindedly, the slight curl of her lips as she paused over a line. That small, private gesture made him hesitate, caught between wanting to intrude and the need to be near her. Opportunity came in the quietest form. Her coffee cup wobbled precariously as she reached for her phone, and without thinking, he stepped forward. His hand brushed the cup to steady it, just enough for her not to spill a drop. She looked up, startled, eyes widening slightly, and then softened into a small, almost shy smile. Their eyes met for a heartbeat longer than polite social interaction demanded. He noticed the depth in her gaze, the warmth, the subtle curiosity, the flicker of amusement as though she knew she had his full attention without needing to say a word. There was a gentle tension in that shared moment, the kind that isn't loud or obvious but resonates with quiet electricity. He offered a simple comment about the book she was reading, careful not to overstep. Her voice, when she replied, was smooth and measured, each word deliberate. Yet it carried an unexpected lightness, a warmth that made him lean just a little closer to catch every nuance. He noticed how her shoulder relaxed slightly as they spoke, how her hands settled calmly on the table. The subtle exhale of ease mingled with surprise. For the first time, he felt the unspoken possibility of connection, a delicate thread weaving between them. He sensed her attentiveness, not just polite interest, but a genuine willingness to engage. And in that attention, he found a rare kind of thrill, the awareness that she wasn't simply someone to admire from afar, but a person capable of noticing him too. His own hand brushed against the edge of the table as he gestured, and for a fleeting moment, their fingers nearly touched. That near contact sent an unexpected shiver through him. Not desire, exactly, but a keen awareness of proximity and presence. Even the mundane sounds around them seemed sharper, more vivid. The quiet clink of her spoon against the ceramic cup, the faint rustle of paper as she turned a page, the distant hum of conversation fading into a soft background melody. Every small detail heightened the sense of intimacy, of being present in a shared, unspoken space. When the conversation ended, she gave a polite nod, standing gracefully before departing. But as she walked away, he noticed the subtle sway of her hair, the quiet confidence in her step, the warmth lingering in the space where she had been. Something had shifted. Not a declaration of love, not yet, but the first real spark of connection, fragile and luminous, ready to deepen. That day, he left the cafe with a heartbeat slightly faster, a mind racing with questions, and a quiet certainty. This was not a fleeting encounter. The story had begun, slowly, and every small gesture, every brief touch, every shared look would carry weight in the days to come. Days passed, yet her presence lingered in his mind like a soft echo he couldn't shake. He found himself replaying small details, the tilt of her head when she smiled, the faint scent of her perfume that seemed to cling to his memory, the way her eyes had lingered on his for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. It wasn't infatuation, not in the frantic way of first crushes. It was subtler, more insistent, a quiet ache of curiosity and admiration, mixed with the recognition that she carried an elegance and depth far beyond appearances. Their next encounter happened almost by accident, though he was beginning to suspect fate had a hand in it. She was at the local library, tucked between the stacks as if guarding a secret world of her own. He noticed the way she shifted, careful not to draw attention, yet somehow impossible to miss. Her fingers hovered over the spines of books, tracing the edges lightly, as though connecting with each one through touch alone. The way she paused over a title, brow slightly furrowed, the corner of her mouth twitching in thought. These small, intimate details drew him closer without a word spoken. He wanted to speak, to offer some comment or shared observation, yet hesitation rooted him in place. She was older, more experienced, poised in ways he wasn't, and the social awareness of that age difference pressed on him like a subtle weight. What could he possibly say that wouldn't feel presumptuous? And yet, as he watched her, he noticed glimpses of quiet vulnerability. A sigh as she settled into a chair, a hand brushing hair from her face, a fleeting shadow in her eyes that hinted at loneliness or weariness. These human cracks in her composed exterior made her even more magnetic, and he felt a protective impulse stir. Their eyes met briefly as she glanced up, and in that instant, the world seemed to narrow again. He felt the unspoken dialogue between them. Curiosity, recognition, hesitation. His chest tightened slightly, awareness sharpened by the delicate tension of not wanting to overstep. Each small gesture, her crossing a leg, the way her hand rested lightly on the table, the way she adjusted her scarf, carried weight, inviting observation, yet maintaining a boundary he could not breach. He found himself analyzing, reflecting, imagining the conversations that could exist between them, the quiet exchanges that might reveal who she truly was beneath the poised exterior. Every interaction felt like a tentative dance, steps measured, pauses loaded with unspoken meaning. He noticed how her smile softened when she thought no one was watching, The way her shoulders relaxed when she allowed herself a moment of comfort, and the faint warmth in her voice when she spoke to others, revealing subtle kindness and thoughtfulness. At night, he replayed these moments endlessly, torn between the desire to approach and the hesitation born of respect. The awareness of her life experience, her self-possession, her independence. It was both daunting and irresistible. He recognized a slow-burning attraction forming, one that demanded patience, careful observation, and understanding. This wasn't the rush of youthful infatuation. It was a deliberate, simmering awareness, a recognition of someone worth watching, worth waiting for. By the time he left the library that day, he carried a quiet determination alongside the hesitation. He wasn't rushing toward anything, yet he knew, deep in that pulsing awareness, that their paths were converging, inch by careful inch, toward a story neither of them could ignore. The next time they met, it wasn't in the quiet of a cafe or library, but at a small gathering, an informal event where friends and acquaintances had gathered in the soft glow of early evening. She moved through the space with her usual grace, a quiet confidence in every step, yet there was a subtle tension around her, a stiffness that didn't escape his attention. Across the room, another man approached, eager, too forward, and the way he leaned in to speak, voice low and persuasive, made the narrator's chest tighten. He could see the polite deflection in her posture, the slight lift of her chin, the way her hand hovered briefly between them like a barrier. He didn't step forward immediately. There was a part of him that wanted to measure, to observe, to respect the natural flow of her social world. But when the other man's hand grazed hers, too familiar, too bold, something inside him stirred sharply. Without conscious thought, he moved closer, just enough for his presence to register. A subtle yet unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. His hand brushed lightly against her back as she shifted slightly toward him, the contact gentle but deliberate. She exhaled softly, a sound so quiet it almost blended into the background music. Yet it was a note of relief he caught in an instant. The other man faltered, noticing the shift, sensing the unspoken barrier that had formed. The narrator's voice, calm but steady, cut through the tension. A simple comment, a polite yet firm assertion of attention, enough to redirect the moment without confrontation. Her body language softened under his presence, the tightness in her shoulders easing, her hands resting naturally on the table, her gaze lifting with a faint, grateful smile. She didn't need words to convey thanks. The quiet shift in her posture, the way she leaned subtly toward him, spoke volumes. In that instant, he became acutely aware of the invisible thread connecting them. A slow but undeniable bond forming in the space between light touches and shared glances. Every detail was amplified, the warmth radiating from her skin where his hand had brushed, the soft, controlled laughter she returned to friends nearby, the glint of acknowledgement in her eyes. He felt the protective instinct surge, not as dominance, but as an urgent desire to ensure she felt safe, respected, and seen exactly as she was. This moment, fleeting yet intense, established a quiet claim, one rooted in care and emotional intimacy rather than possession. The narrative tension wasn't about overt confrontation. It was in the subtleties, the brush of a hand, the gentle positioning of his body, the timing of a glance that made her feel secure amidst the pressure. He wasn't rushing, not yet. He was simply present, attuned, responsive to her cues, and aware of the shifting dynamics around her. By the time the evening drew to a close, the other man had drifted away, disarmed by subtle boundaries and quiet confidence. She lingered near him for a moment, a small smile tugging at her lips, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. No words were needed. The tension had eased, replaced by a tentative trust. And in that delicate space, he understood. This protective closeness, born of subtle gestures and awareness, was only the beginning. A deeper connection was quietly taking root, slow, deliberate, and entirely theirs to nurture. After the subtle confrontation at the gathering, a quiet rhythm developed between them. Their encounters became deliberate but unhurried, each one an opportunity to observe, to understand, to feel the unspoken bond deepening. He noticed the small ways she revealed herself. A laugh shared over a trivial joke, a glance held slightly longer than necessary, a soft exhale when she felt comfortable enough to let her guard down. It happened on a rainy afternoon, under the muted gray of an overcast sky. They found themselves sharing a bench at a small park, the gentle patter of rain creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. She tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear, and he couldn't help but notice the way her fingers lingered on the edge of her coat, a subtle sign of vulnerability. He spoke first, carefully, his voice calm yet deliberate, offering a comment about the rain, the way it softened the world around them. She responded with a smile, not forced, but the kind that reaches the eyes, warm, open, and slightly uncertain. The pause that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection building between them. He leaned just a little closer, aware of the small space between them, noticing the subtle warmth radiating from her presence. When he finally spoke again, it was with a sincerity that bypassed casual conversation entirely. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, eyes catching hers, "that it feels like I notice everything about you, even the little things you don't realize anyone sees." His words hung in the air, gentle yet unshakably real. She looked down, brushing her hand lightly against her own arm, a soft blush creeping across her cheeks. That hesitation, that quiet pause, only made the moment more electric. He continued carefully, ensuring the weight of his words was clear without being overwhelming. "You have this presence, this balance of strength and warmth, and it's impossible not to respect it, not to feel drawn to it." He let his hand hover near hers, intentionally close but not intrusive, giving her space to respond in her own time. She shifted slightly, a subtle movement that felt like an invitation, a silent permission to bridge the emotional distance. And then it happened. Her eyes met his again, steady, vulnerable, and somehow trusting. In that instant, he realized the depth of the connection had already been formed. It was no longer about curiosity or hesitation. There was a quiet recognition between them, a mutual understanding that the emotional thread had been woven long before these words were spoken. She didn't need him to declare anything explicit. Her glance, her posture, the soft sigh she let escape were all affirmation enough. For the first time, he felt safe in acknowledging his feelings aloud, not as desire but as appreciation, admiration, and subtle claim. A gentle assertion that he was present, aware, and ready to stand as her confidant, protector, and companion. The tension lingered, not in urgency or need, but in the quiet intimacy of shared space, of mutual awareness, of unspoken acknowledgement that this connection was unique, precious, and entirely theirs. By the end of that afternoon, as the rain tapered off, a subtle shift had taken place. The unspoken tension between them had deepened into something tangible, a fragile, luminous bond waiting to grow stronger, slow burn and deliberate, grounded in trust, observation, and the quiet thrill of emotional intimacy. The tension that had been building for weeks reached its subtle crescendo one evening at a small social gathering, where familiarity and proximity collided. She was there, as graceful and composed as ever, but tonight there was a shadow of unease in her posture. Across the room, the same man who had previously pressed for attention lingered, too confident, too insistent. He leaned in as if proximity alone could claim her, speaking in a tone meant to charm. Every movement of his, every casual brush against her arm, triggered a protective awareness in the narrator, sharp and insistent. He didn't move abruptly, but his presence shifted, becoming both calm and undeniable. The other man faltered slightly as he sensed the silent claim, though he couldn't articulate it. He stepped closer to her, the subtle warmth of his hand brushing hers, grounding her, anchoring her attention. She exhaled softly, a quiet sigh that spoke volumes, a moment of relief, recognition, and trust. The narrator's voice broke the tension. Not loud, not aggressive, but firm, deliberate, and layered with sincerity. "I think she's already taken." The words were simple, yet the weight behind them was unmistakable. He wasn't threatening or possessive in a cruel sense. He was asserting care, attentiveness, and a quiet devotion that had been growing over time. Every small gesture, the slight lean toward her, the steadying touch of his hand on the small of her back, the soft, attentive gaze, reinforced the message. She looked at him then, and in her eyes, he saw acknowledgement, relief, and the flicker of something deeper, trust, and perhaps affection. The subtle shift in her posture, shoulders relaxing, body leaning ever so slightly toward him, spoke more loudly than words ever could. The air between them was charged with unspoken emotion, a quiet storm of admiration, protection, and mutual understanding. The other man, realizing the invisible barrier, the depth of connection, stepped back, defeated by a force he couldn't contest. The narrator's presence wasn't loud or forceful. It was steady, unwavering, and profoundly intimate. He could feel her warmth radiating toward him, a soft brush of energy that lingered wherever their proximity allowed. Every detail, the gentle flutter of her hair, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she exhaled, the way her gaze held his, magnified the moment, making it simultaneously exhilarating and tender. In that instance, a slow, deliberate victory unfolded, not of dominance, but of emotional intimacy, of someone seeing her fully and stepping into that space responsibly, respectfully, and attentively. He had quietly claimed her attention, her trust, and her heart, without words of entitlement or force. By the time the evening ended, the tension had melted into something warm and unspoken. They walked together afterward, side by side, their proximity intimate but respectful, each step a quiet affirmation of the bond they had formed. The world around them faded slightly, as if it had paused to honor the moment of recognition, of mutual understanding. The narrator knew, as they shared a brief smile, that this was the turning point, the emotional peak of their slow-burn journey. The protective instinct, the subtle claim, and the acknowledgement of her trust had created a connection that was real, human, and enduring. It wasn't just about being taken. It was about the quiet, deliberate formation of a bond built on respect, warmth, and the understated intensity of a slow-burning romance. After the quiet declaration of emotional possession, the she's taken moment, the world around them seemed to settle into a gentler rhythm. They were no longer two strangers circling each other with hesitation and curiosity. They had begun to navigate the same space, the same emotional terrain, together. Their interactions, once marked by subtle observation and tentative gestures, now carried the soft confidence of familiarity and mutual trust. It was a warm evening when they walked together through a quiet city street, the sun dipping low, casting golden reflections off the windows. He noticed the faint weight of her coat brushing against his arm, the subtle brush of her fingers against his as they fell into step together. It was a small, unassuming gesture, yet charged with the intimacy that had been growing between them. Every glance, every shared smile, conveyed understanding without the need for words. She laughed lightly at something he said, and the sound felt richer now, layered with comfort and subtle affection. Her eyes lingered on his face just a moment longer than casual politeness demanded, and he felt a quiet thrill, not of possession, but of recognition. Recognition that they were both invested in this slow, deliberate connection, that they had crossed the invisible line from curiosity and hesitation to trust and companionship. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by small, meaningful touches, a hand brushing her hair back from her face, a gentle nudge of his shoulder as he guided her along the uneven pavement. He was careful, attentive, aware of the weight of each gesture. Each touch was deliberate, conveying reassurance, warmth, and the growing emotional intimacy that words alone could not capture. At a quiet park bench, they paused. He watched her settle into the seat with the same graceful composure he had noticed weeks ago, and for a moment, he simply observed. The subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the gentle curve of her lips as she glanced toward him, the warmth radiating from her presence. He extended his hand, and she accepted it naturally, letting her fingers rest against his in a brief, lingering touch. It was a touch that spoke of mutual respect, shared understanding, and the quiet promise of something enduring. They talked then, honestly and openly, sharing thoughts, small vulnerabilities, and fleeting confessions that deepened the bond between them. He noticed the soft exhale of relief in her voice, the way she leaned slightly closer, not out of dependence, but out of comfort and trust. The emotional distance that had once existed had softened, replaced by a steady, warm connection. By the time the sun had fully set, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, they stood side by side, shoulders brushing lightly, smiles shared in silence. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, just a quiet affirmation that their journey, slow-burning and deliberate, had reached a place of harmony. The hesitation, the protective instincts, the emotional tension, all had led to this natural resolution, a connection built on trust, admiration, and subtle romantic intimacy. As they walked away together, the world felt a little brighter, quieter, and fuller. Their story, from the first glance to the tentative touch, had come full circle. There was no need for more drama, no cliffhanger needed. What remained was warmth, subtle affection, and the unspoken promise of a shared journey ahead, slow, steady, and profoundly human.